Are you feeling lost in a digital wilderness? Welcome to Lost in Cyberia. We are your guide to navigating the world of cyberspace.
So, whether you're a tech enthusiast or you're looking to land your first job in InfoSec, we're here to break things down into bite sized pieces so that you don't have to. Hello, we are recording our presentation that we're doing at CyberCon. Our talk is titled Revenge of the Nerds, Confronting Gender Bias in Cybersecurity and Cybercrime. Now, when we first thought about doing this as a topic, it reminded me of a comedy show that I went to in New York quite a few years ago, where this guy did his whole routine based around the idea of the jocks that used to run the playground, and now we have given that kind of power over to these tech bros that have come through Silicon Valley and, you know, who are now the cool kids on the block, and they're the ones who have all the money and they're throwing all these big elaborate parties and stuff, and basically asking the audience, you know, how did this happen? And basically that's what we're exploring today in this talk. Basically the idea behind it, and for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Annie-Mei. Further on in this talk, you'll see Anika as well. We will be co-presenting this topic. We kind of have been discussing this in, you know, private, like one-on-one, about this idea that we feel that a lot of these events that we go to for these women in cyber or women in tech events, it feels like we're speaking in an echo chamber because everyone there already knows what the issues are that women face in working in a male-dominated industry. And it's about creating an open dialogue for everyone to have their say and make everybody aware. And yeah, we're not saying that these women-led organisations are a bad thing, but it's more just that we should be including men in these conversations. And for example, so a couple of years ago, I had a male mentor who told me that he wanted to present at one of these women organisations, and I won't say which one it was, but they basically told him that they don't allow men to speak at their events, which I thought was quite odd, and also that in itself is discrimination. And how can we encourage more men to attend these events if, for one, there's no other men there? And obviously, you know, the whole concept of these events is to have an inclusive environment. And one way to encourage more men to come to these events, I think, is to have more male speakers, and it's good to see people's different perspectives on these issues. So I nearly left the industry after 4 months. This was nearly 4 years ago now, and the first cybersecurity company I ever worked in was really toxic. It was a really negative environment created by the owner of this company. It just wasn't a very nice place to work, even though I did genuinely like the other people who worked in this small company. This job caused me a lot of anxiety and stress, and it wasn't until after I left that job that I realized how bad it was. Just a lot of toxic behavior towards, you know, how I saw other people treated, the types of behavior that were seen as acceptable, that I'd never seen anywhere else I'd worked. And I guess as someone who's come from more female-dominated industries like teaching, communications, digital marketing, it wasn't something I'd ever seen before. So yeah, it was quite confronting for me, and I guess it's why I'm so passionate now about helping others navigate their way if they're looking to pivot into such a male-dominant industry like cybersecurity. While our conversation is around the toxicity that does exist within the industry, we are in no way saying that, you know, all men are the problem. It's more about including them in the dialogue, and also opening that discussion to everybody. And we'll also be looking at it from the perspective of not only what women experience within the industry itself, but also what women experience online. So today we're going to be discussing hypermasculinity. And hypermasculinity is a psychological term that was coined to describe the exaggeration of masculine cultural stereotypes within subcultures. So in gaming culture, we see this hypermasculine stereotype a lot. So when we think of casual gamers, we think of women who play games like Words with Friends or Farmville. You know, they're not kind of taken seriously, whereas the hardcore gamers tend to play games with lots of guns and violence and there's wars happening, and these tend to be stereotyped by white males. Another thing in gaming culture, female characters are often over-sexualized, which means that when women go to choose female characters, they have very few options for a start, and especially very limited in terms of finding realistic or non-sexualized options. Now, in cybersecurity, we see this hacker in a hoodie stereotype, the technical mastermind that needs to be left alone in the basement because he has this technical prowess. And unfortunately, this image is not only an unrealistic portrayal of what day-to-day work in cybersecurity is, but it also means that people can't see themselves in the industry because they don't know what other roles there are available. I also can't begin to tell you how many times I've had a male in cybersecurity come up to me and say, Annie-Mei, I just can't understand why we can't find any women to work in our company. Studies have shown that women are already discouraged to pursue careers in both IT and cybersecurity due to a lack of role models. They usually find themselves in an unwelcoming environment. And again, these stereotypes also play into why they feel like they don't belong in that type of environment. I had a woman that I had mentored a couple of years ago who had just gone through a cybersecurity program that was designed to help people transition from a different industry into cybersecurity. And I had actually put her forward for a role at a previous company I worked at because I thought she would be a good fit culturally. I thought she would fit in well with the team. And they told me that they decided not to continue with her application because she was unable to work full-time due to being a full-time carer for her children. And they said that she would require a lot of training, a lot of time would need to be put in to help her succeed in that role. Now, I've seen other people who are cybersecurity students who've gotten roles in other companies where they're only able to work 1 or 2 days a week. So it's these problems that continue to arise which prevent women entering the industry to begin with. So I want to talk about the evolution of nerd culture. Now, this revenge of the nerd is a cultural phenomenon that we've seen throughout American culture since the 1980s. And it's this idea of a man fitting this nerd profile. You know, he's a little bit socially awkward. He's a bit reserved. He's kind of into I guess what the general public perceives as like weird hobbies, you know, could be into gaming or whatever it is that he does in his spare time, and kind of goes against this, you know, American masculine stereotype, but manages to find success and wealth. And due to this, he's grudgingly accepted by society as a culturally relevant man. Now, this isn't unique to the US. We've seen this throughout Western culture as well. And we also saw the rise of the gatekeeper nerd. So this was basically at the time when non-white male men were starting to use the internet. And, you know, they were basically now the top of the food chain. And instead of creating a utopian environment where everyone could be accepted and enjoy this kind of online space, they brought in these hierarchical and aggressive kind of social structure, which they had experienced at school. So understanding, I guess, what the struggles that these nerds, in quotation marks, were experiencing throughout into the 2000s, we can start to see why, like how this online world was already being formed. There was a manifesto of nerd masculinity that appeared in the early 2000s, and it was basically this guy, this jock guy, saying to these nerds like, "I used to beat the crap out of you when, at school. And then they're basically looking at him going, well, things have changed, mate. You're no longer running the playground. This is our space. And so you can start to see that there's a lot of this revenge is being driven by adolescent trauma, because these nerds were the last ones to be picked for a sports team, or were rejected by a girl to go to the prom or the formal with them. So this image of the hacker in the hoodie is a way for men to reject the social expectations of mainstream society. Now, this can be a positive thing because it can breed creativity and innovation, but unfortunately it can also cause isolation, resentment, and entitlement. So if we look at Kevin Mitnick, for example, for anyone who's not familiar, he was a notorious hacker from the 1980s to the early 2000s. So Anika and I have both read his book, Ghost in the Wires. And it's basically the story of his life. It talks about his upbringing, how he got into hacking, and then finally how he was arrested by the FBI. I'd heard so much about him that I was really excited to read this book, but unfortunately I was a little disappointed. For a start, when I read a book, I want to really relate to the main character because, you want to feel sorry for them when bad things happen to them and you want them to succeed and all of those things. But I found him very unlikable. I felt like he was trying to get the audience to like him, but he just came across as a bit of a jerk. And even though he wasn't hacking for money, it was just a lack of remorse that he showed towards his victims. Now, compare him to someone like Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple. And I read Woz's book, I Was, last year, and I really enjoyed it. And I could be a little bit biased because my first computer at 7 years old was a Strawberry iMac, and I've used Apple ever since. But I think even though they had similar paths, their lives and their personalities couldn't be more different. So they both grew up in California and they both had a fascination for telephone systems, technology, computers. While Steve Wozniak went on to revolutionize personal computing, Mitnick was socially engineering and phone phreaking to manipulate telecom systems. Phone phreaking is the practice of manipulating phone systems. It was popular from the 1960s to the 1980s until digital systems replaced those analog phone systems. And while there's no denying that Mitnick's exploits have paved the way for modern cybersecurity awareness, there was definitely a vindictive streak about him because he went after companies and individuals who said negative things about him. So fast forward to today, and we have people like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, and Jeff Bezos who basically run the world. And to me, Zuckerberg is the epitome of a nerd wanting to be liked, wanting to fit in. And before Facebook, he started a website called Face Mash. And this was basically a way for Harvard students to compare their classmates and rank them on their attractiveness. Facebook started in 2004, and now the parent company, Meta, is now the 7th most valued company in the world, valued at over 2 trillion Australian dollars. I saw a YouTube video that this guy made, and he was basically poking fun at all these big tech billionaires. And he said that Mark Zuckerberg looks like a piece of broccoli with a Billabong gift card, which I thought was hilarious. But at the end of the day, these people, I'm sure they're not losing any sleep at night, the fact that people are poking fun at them, but then who knows? But yeah, they really do have such a big say in what kind of content and how we talk to each other online. I think it's 1 in 3 people in the world access a Meta product every single day. So news articles around the misuse of technology are appearing almost on a daily basis. And someone who's garnered a lot of both positive and negative media attention is Taylor Swift, one of the world's biggest pop stars. So for some context, in January 2024, AI-generated deepfake porn was circulating on the platform X, formerly known as Twitter. Now, some of these images were viewed more than 45 million times before they were eventually taken down. But it brought into question, what is the responsibility of these social media platforms to regulate this type of content, and how can they protect the victim? So Sensity, which is a visual threat detection company based in Amsterdam, released a report in 2019, and it showed that there were over 15,000 deepfake images circulating online. The following year, that number had gone up to 49,000. So in the space of a year, that number had increased by 300%. In 2021, they reported that of the 85,000 deepfakes that were circulating online, 90% of them depicted non-consensual porn featuring women. So Amnesty International has stated that X has failed to protect women on its platform, and done nothing to stop this type of material circulating so openly on and being able to be shared so quickly online. And they also said that this lack of action from X has meant that women are scared to speak up online because they don't want this to happen to them as well. Now, the issue with this is this virality of this content is what makes social media platforms money. So there's very little incentive for them to take it down. And as you can see with the Taylor Swift example, it basically says to women that it doesn't matter how successful or powerful you are, we can diminish you to a sex object and there's nothing that you can do about it, even if you were named Time Person of the Year. So these digital safety concerns are often treated separately to cybersecurity, and there's very little regulation of these social media platforms. A study was done by the University of Sydney Business School where 31 cybersecurity experts were, with a median time in the industry of 17 years, were interviewed. So these were cybersecurity executives from publicly listed companies, from companies like financial institutions, energy and infrastructure, and transport. And these execs were asked a number of questions, including what their definition of cybersecurity was. So the study was interesting in that there was a divide into what they defined as cybersecurity. Now, they all agreed that cybersecurity encompasses the protection of data, the protection of information, but there was a divide when it came to the protection of people, and especially when it came to online experiences such as online harassment, bullying, etc. The study showed that women tended to agree that this online harassment, deep fakes, etc., this intersects with cybersecurity, whereas men tended to say that this played more into the realm of e-safety and that this was separate from cybersecurity. Which begs the question that if these experts can't even clearly define what isn't cybersecurity, then how are we supposed to communicate this to the general public? Another interesting aspect to the study was that while the participants were clear that cybersecurity should not be defined by this image of a hacker in a hoodie, they were unclear as to how it should be defined. So this means that these stereotypes of, males in the basement at their computers can continue to flourish. So I'll now hand over to Anika to continue talking about cybercrime.
Thank you, Annie-Mei, and this is a great segue to show you that this dichotomy also applies to the world of cybercrime. Cybercrime is often divided by scholars and industry professionals into cyber-enabled crimes and cyber-dependent crimes. The dependent crimes are new, requiring a significant knowledge of computers and cannot be done without technology, whilst the enabled ones are your old crimes, such as theft and harassment and abuse, but facilitated with the help of technology, thus making cyber harassment, cyber stalking, etc. Those crimes do not necessarily require specialist technical knowledge and are more neglected in the field of cybercrime policing, unfortunately. A good example would be a recent TV show, Baby Reindeer, where the main character comes to report cyber stalking and harassment to police station, and is being laughed at and turned away. Cyber-dependent crimes, however, such as ransomware, have been on the mind of policymakers and the police for some time now, and you can actually report this via Report Cyber. It may be interesting to note that cyber-enabled crime victims can be anyone, but the majority of the victims come from marginalized communities, such as the elderly and women and children. The victims of cyber-dependent crimes, well, according to the definition anyway, are computers and data itself, which goes really well with the research findings around cybersecurity and cyber safety, which Annie-Mei presented earlier. So now that we know a little bit more about the nature of cybercrime, let's talk about the actual exciting stuff, which is cybercrime theory. Feminist crime theories started evolving out of the fact that most criminals were men. Instead of positing that crimes committed by men were done so due to biological, social, or financial factors, the feminist theory asks, why don't women commit more crimes then? And why are there so many crimes against women, especially when they come from intimate partners? When it comes to cyberspace, most criminals are also men, keeping up with the trend. An Australian feminist scholar, R.W. Connell, coined the term hegemonic masculinity to explain crime committed by men against both men and women. She explains that hegemonic masculinity is the ruling type, the type of masculinity that dominates all other masculinity types such as complicit, marginalized, and subordinate masculinities. Around the time that she coined it, it would have been someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Rambo. And this stereotype gradually changed, just like Annie-Mei has described. That all started around 1995, when Bill Gates became the richest man in the world, and that really moved his position from subordinate masculinity to hegemonic masculinity. We can see the average node also moving from the marginalized position all the way to complicit and perhaps even hegemonic, and that movement continues throughout the early 2010s and so on, around the time when shows like The Big Bang Theory were really big on the TV. What is happening now is that we have a new type of hegemonic masculinity when it comes to technology. We have the tech bros and the bro-oligarchy that are the ruling class, which really explains people like Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, etc. And even though there is a really clear hierarchy and the triangle is considered to be the strongest shape in geometry, this model of masculinity itself is incredibly fragile, hence where the term fragile masculinity comes from. Because to uphold this hegemonic masculinity factors takes quite a lot of effort in the ever-changing world. Even to uphold status such as complicit masculinity or even marginalized masculinity takes quite a lot of effort because it requires you to possess certain qualities and uphold them and constantly upkeep them, which could explain a lot of the glow-ups that Bezos, Musk, and Zuckerberg are going through. Just imagine the amount of cosmetic surgery that Elon Musk had to go to remain the kind of stereotype of someone who presents in a very masculine manner and is also a nerd and is also quite wealthy. So all of the three factors are combined in there. Musk had surgeries such as hair transplant, nose surgery, and chin transplants just to maintain that look of a man, which some could argue is actually gender-affirming surgery. Now, if we talk about what is the place of a woman in this pyramid, well, they don't have a place in this pyramid because they're women. According to the theory anyway, a woman is dominated and controlled by all these types of masculinities because the point of masculinity is to dominate and control all the other subtypes, but ultimately women. So you can be a nerd, you can be someone that comes from LGBTQIA plus community, you can be someone from a different race, but you will essentially still benefit from the patriarchal system where women are supposed to be controlled and dominated, and men are considered to be the dominating class. And as you can see, the theory explains quite well the crimes against women, because whenever women rebel against this stereotype, so just to be honest, exist, men will try to dominate them, and they're so afraid of losing their status of masculinity that they are threatened just by mere existence of women, and hence why they commit crimes against women who are questioning the system or who are questioning their own masculinity, and also men who don't subscribe to this particular model. Men who are perhaps not as patriarchal or as masculine, or anyone that will identify essentially as any of the other types. And specifically with women, we can see that in domestic violence, where a woman tries to leave an abusive relationship or actually any type of relationship, we can see a 70% increase in cases of domestic violence and also around pregnancy. So how does it actually happen? If we look at young boys growing up, they don't actually express any types of violence or any type of this masculinity pyramid climbing, unless they have been radicalized from a very, very young age. But our boys are pushed these types of messages everywhere, whether it will be in their own families, in schools, in universities, in their workplaces, that they have to dominate and they have to control. They can never be a girl. They cannot cry and show empathy and emotion. They cannot be weak. They cannot be sassy. That will make them not manly enough. And then they will be essentially shunned from the society, which is a human's worst fear, according to some theorists. It's no wonder that getting physically fit is such a wide gateway to manosphere and getting radicalized even further, because a lot of men feel essentially inferior in that masculinity model. They will try to work out, they will try to appear more masculine, and then they stumble upon areas of the internet which tell them that it's not just that they need to work out more, but they also need to dominate over women and over other subordinate types of masculinities in order to remain hegemonic, but also that they need to be tougher from the inside and from the outside. When it comes to cybersecurity, it actually explains why we have such incredible burnout in the industry, where we are so out of touch with our feelings, trying to constantly reappear more masculine. This is a very healthy way, of course, to deal with your emotions and stress in general, isn't it? And you might say, okay, Anika, this is all great, but we're talking about computers and data here. It's technology. Shouldn't this be a bit more neutral? Well, no. I mean, it would be nice if technology freed us of gendered crimes and we all became cyborgs and focused on being happy. However, technology is far from neutral, as it is made in our biased world, just as AI is biased because it is trained on biased data. Donna Haraway, a feminist theorist and scientist who was way ahead of her time in 1985, wrote the Cyborg Manifesto, which I strongly recommend that you read, where she expressed the hope that technology will set us free from gendered constraints, because gender is, after all, a social construct. However, as technology stemmed from the defense industry, such as internet stemmed from ARPANET, for instance, the balance was skewed to start with. Cybersecurity is probably the epitome of hypermasculine tech culture, as even the language used daily in the industry is extremely patriarchal. Our programs, for instance, have vulnerabilities, which are extremely bad. Remember, hegemonic masculinity doesn't allow for this. And if the vulnerability doesn't get patched, which patch literally means patching the hole needs to be closed, then it will get exploited. Really? In order for us to make sure that we don't have any vulnerabilities, we will do occasional penetration testing. Like, you cannot make this up, honestly. This can kind of explain how sometimes a woman or a young woman trying to get into an industry and hearing something like penetration testing for the first time just promptly turns away and leaves. Or phrases such as kill chain or zero-day exploits present this hypermasculine world of cybersecurity where women feel that they don't belong inherently because they're being brought up in a bit of a different way, in a different environment. Now, there is no reason at all why we can't change the language and why we can't call this particular concept something else. For instance, penetration testing, right, can be called something like security assessment, and kill chain can be called threat sequence, and zero-day exploits can be called software vulnerabilities. And perhaps we can also find another word for vulnerabilities and call it a bug or some kind of a mistake, because that's what it is after all. We don't have to essentially talk about it from a perspective of something that needs to be penetrated and entered in order for us to fix it so other people, our enemies, don't enter it. And why is it so important to be so technical? Because being so technical is sometimes a huge barrier for women entering the cybersecurity industry. Well, a nerd is called a nerd for a reason, right? In the early computer days, and even now, they dedicate all of their time to their job and craftsmanship, sacrificing relationships with their family and peers in order to achieve excellence in their craft. While there is absolutely nothing wrong with that, The nerd masculinity then takes revenge on everyone else who didn't live the same nerd life and didn't experience their suffering, and gatekeeps them out of the nerd industries, cybersecurity being one. A good example for that is Elon Musk, who repeatedly tells people how he was bullied in school and how it drives his fuel for success. However, if you examine Musk's behavior, he is essentially a big bully himself. So nerds don't accept people that haven't gone through this hurtful experience of being shunned from the society for being so good at computers, even though some girls definitely have. And for some reason, they think that girls don't get bullied in school, that girls cannot be proper nerds because they are girls, and they cannot be possibly bullied because they never had to compete in this masculinity triangle. They're completely ignoring, however, the fact that even being marginalized masculinity, they still benefit significantly from the patriarchal system, where men will continue dominating over women no matter where they stand in that hegemonic masculinity pyramid, and women will continue to get shunned out of the industries that are quite profitable and that can actually generate way more success and security for them. This is quite interesting to examine as well, because we have mentioned Kevin Mitnick in the talk before. Now, Kevin Mitnick was considered to be the most wanted hacker of all times. But the cybersecurity industry, if you go to forums and read about their opinion of him, don't consider him to be a great hacker at all. They say that he was a really good social engineer. And to be a good social engineer, you need really good people skills. And those are not considered to be good in the hacker community. Only being technical is considered to be proper nerd. So why is this a problem, you say? Well, because we're not actually keeping people cyber safe. We are focusing on outside enemies. We are waiting on cyber wars so much that we are almost willing to start them ourselves. I mean, this is a whole scenario of sheep, sheepdogs, and wolves, where usually sheep are more terrified of sheepdogs because they see them more often than the wolves, and wolves are more resembling of sheepdogs than the sheep. Imagine a friend that you know that laughs at all of the people that get hacked, which happens quite a lot in the cybersecurity industry. How many people do you think come to him and say, hey, can you please help me with something here? I wonder if I got hacked, or wonder if my password perhaps is not strong enough, or if I should use this password manager. I wouldn't, because they would probably just laugh at me. Tech is being used more and more to facilitate crimes, cyber-enabled crimes especially. However, we are not paying attention. In the meantime, our own people, men, women, and children, get attacked, harassed, defrauded, and abused. To me, this reminds of blaming the victim. And whenever I hear the term blaming the victim, what comes into my head is, what were you even wearing when it comes to sexual assault cases? But when it comes to the cybersecurity hacks, it's like the victims deserve to be defrauded and hacked because they were using the same password for everything, or because they were not following the latest and greatest cybersecurity procedures like we do. But we have to remember that the average Australian doesn't know this information. And this information, apart from being extremely hypermasculine and coded, is gatekept from the people. So we have to start focusing on keeping people cyber safe. Another reason for that may be the fact that we only have 17% of women in cybersecurity and only 9% of them in very technical areas. If we don't have proper representation of the population in the cybersecurity policy areas and product manufacturing, how can our policies mitigate the threats that an average Australian faces? Moreover, most women in the cybersecurity sector drop out after 4 years, as was found out by recent research from the RMIT University. And although the reason influencing this may vary, the hypermasculine culture remains a deciding factor. And so where do we go from here? Well, I think we need a feminine Ferdinand. But does it happen? No. Change doesn't happen in one day. And it's not going to be made by IWD, cupcakes, and by only women events, unfortunately. It's similarly to Chanel Conte's concept of teacher's consent, where it started as a grassroots movement. We are the ones that need to be driving the change every day. And we need you to be driving with us. Every person watching this, every person that works in the industry, every person that thinks about working in the industry or is working in the cyber-adjacent industry needs to be driving this change. To challenge the hyper-masculine nature of technology and cybersecurity, When you hear something that is not right and doesn't seem right, and you know inside of yourself that it needs to be challenged, just say so. And when you hear somebody saying that, support them. Perhaps people around you also feel this way. Just as men are victims of violent crimes committed by other men, same goes for the cybercrime, so please remember that. They affect everyone. And the whole purpose of cybersecurity is to ensure people's cyber safety. People are, and will remain, a huge factor in this equation. Show more empathy towards the victims of cybercrimes every day, and those who are not tech-savvy as you are. They deserve this empathy and will have less hesitation to come forward to you next time with advice before something bad happens. And in conclusion, we would like to end with a brilliant quote from the Social Network movie. You're going to go through life thinking that girls don't like you because you're a nerd. And I want you to know from the bottom of my heart that that won't be true. It will be because you're an asshole. So please go back to your lives with this thought and help us make everyone be cyber safe, just by being a good person and driving change. Thank you.